Should have not told you without the trigger warning. However,
It's funny, it looks like he outlived Aristotle,
I think they were contemporaries.
but he is older.
There's some interesting things associated with the Cynic philosophy and Diogenes in particular. When we go further, we might read a book, or you might read a book by Robert Funk, titled "Honest Jesus." Looks like it's even on the internet for free. Honest to Jesus. Robert Funk is one of the theologians in the Jesus Seminar, and he argues in this book that Jesus was a follower of John the Baptist. Well, that's actually pretty obvious. He goes to John the Baptist. If you remember, John the Baptist is baptizing people and the Jordan River, right? And Jesus comes up, and John ends up baptizing Jesus. And so basically, Funk argues that Jesus was a follower of John the Baptist. And when we study about John the Baptist, what we gather from the description of John the Baptist is that he was a Cynic philosopher. So he's literally kind of following Diogenes, following Socrates. So if you're looking at the second or the first test that I have, I think the last question on the test is compare Socrates and Jesus. And if you're reading Robert Funk, you might feel like, well, Jesus is actually a Cynic, so influenced by the philosophy of Socrates. So that's kind of fun, kind of interesting if you get into that. And you can see where that applies to the life of Jesus. So if you're being honest to Jesus, says Robert Funk, you should be trying to live a life of just doing what you feel like at the time. Don't get jobs, don't get married, don't get obligations that you have to live up to, and so on. Just travel around and profess, I suppose. So the first one I think of is the Cynic, but then we become a little bit more social. Oh, and by the way, if you go, I don't have any a link for the Cynics, but you can find them pretty easily as I just did. But the next one is Epicurus. Let me just go and get Epicurus. We have quite a lot of writings of Epicurus, from Epicurus. And so we get a good sense of the kind of philosophy Epicurus thought of. In science, he thinks of atoms, and that these atoms are uncuttable little pieces that intermingle with one another and cause all the different things that there are in the universe. Very close, really, to our contemporary point of view, even though we've cut the atom. We've gone down and down and down, trying to find the arche, essentially. But when we think of Epicurean, our most popular use of the word concerns restaurants, usually fancy restaurants that have really weird foods. And what's odd is Epicurus was actually teaching against that kind of food. He thought simple foods were the best because you don't want to get sick. You don't want to eat something weird. Maybe shellfish and things of that sort could poison you. So basically, have a controlled diet and so on. He thought that the best life was the life that was full of happiness. So he wanted to have as much happiness as possible. But he thought in order to have that kind of happiness, he wanted to have good stuff. He wanted to have good food. He didn't want to be a beggar. He didn't want to live out in, the elements. He wanted to have a nice house. And since he was rich and he had his own garden, and his students came and paid him money for his lessons, he had a good life. He had a self-satisfying garden that he could harvest his own foods, and actually he had plenty of servants to do all that. So his belief was, don't get entangled with politics, don't get involved in fighting or any of those things. Just basically have a good time living in your own little, garden, if you could do it. So who do I think of when I think of Epicurean today? I think of people that want to go to Alaska and live out in the bush, have their own cabin, raise their own food, but have a family. They want to raise their kids and so on, out away from all the confusion and everything associated with the town. One of the ones I especially think of in Alaska is Seth Kantner. I don't know if you're familiar with Seth. He's a writer and a photographer, but he, when he was a kid, both of his parents were teachers, I think from Kansas, I forget. But in any case, they got sick and tired of all the stresses of being teachers and living in the town where they were. So the two of them decided that they were going to just pack up, leave, go to Alaska, and basically find a place under the tundra. And they found an old structure under the tundra, and they moved in north of Teller, actually. So if you go up to Nome and then you go to Teller, I remember when I first retired from the Army, I worked for Sears selling computers. And I was actually teaching already, but I also had a job selling computers for Sears, because the amount of money you get teaching is not really sufficient. So even though I had my retirement and I was teaching, I was also working for Sears. And I remember the one time a guy from Teller ordered a Mac, and we had to ship the computer all the way to Teller, and when it got there, it was a sad Mac. It wouldn't turn on. And it turned out that driving to Teller on a rough road basically was probably not good for the computer, so it was hard sending a Mac all the way out to Teller. It's a personal connection to Teller. I actually spent 6 weeks in Nome, too, when I was in the Army. But in any case, Seth grew up in this sod house underneath the tundra, where when the reindeer, or what's the other word for them? Not elk, caribou. The herds of caribou would literally run over their roof. But his father, hunted, caribou. He would shoot maybe 10, 15 caribou, and they would fish and gather all kinds of things, basically living right off the land. To me, that's a perfect example of Epicurus. Might not have pleased Epicurus, because of course you're living in that kind of weather. You can imagine kids, living with bare feet and mice all in their house and everything. If you want to get a good impression of it, have a look at his book, Ordinary Wolves. Show me. So Ordinary Wolves. I really recommend this book, by the way, if you're living in Alaska, as I guess most of you are. Ordinary Wolves really gives you a good explanation of what it's like for individuals that live in the villages that come in and visit Anchorage. absolutely amazing and hilarious, by the way. So have a look at that. So Epicurus. And there we have lots of different articles. I don't know if do I have this link. Do any of my links work, Dave? Doesn't look like it's
Keep
doing
going to
it.
books.
They're
She
old.
wanted to go
Some
to.
of these are old.
Isn't it Stoic philosophy was the next one?
Yeah, that one's not there. But there's quite a few different texts by Epicurus. I'm trying to think if one of the things I remember is
Dichotomy of control.
what am I doing?
I said he wrote dichotomy of control. That's what we talked about a lot.
Let me go to we could just go that way.
There you go.
Instead of using my links, which are old and beat up, you could always just go directly with Google. When I first put those links there, Google didn't work this way, so that was a long time ago. Now you just ask for whatever and you'll find it. But so, kind of different than Plato. Plato thought you shouldn't really study philosophy while you're too young. He recommended waiting until you're about 50 before you study philosophy. And I think one of the reasons why Plato might have thought that way was, look what happened to his teacher Socrates, who got killed because he was teaching the youth. A lot of people didn't like it when the youth got basically persnickety, asking questions and criticizing their elders and things, not doing what they were told, etc. You don't want to be a critical thinker when you're expected to behave, right? So if you think about it, Plato is really kind of protecting himself by saying, wait until you're around 50 before you start studying this stuff. So by then you've had your life, you've had your family obligations, you've done all the things, so now you could just learn for the sake of learning and you don't have to worry about messing up your life. You're now just all set, basically. In other words, basically wait till you're retired and you're not going to mess anything up. Then you can study philosophy. But notice this philosopher doesn't think you should wait. I think one of the reasons for that is because he's got lots of paying customers who are youth. I don't want to tell them, don't study philosophy, you're too young. No, that's not going to work if you're counting on their income, etc. But that's kind of interesting. Of course, in my own life, I was raised Roman Catholic. I believed everything that I was taught. When I got to college and I had philosophy class, and the philosophy professor asked questions like I've been trying to ask you guys. That's our job, right? I was shook. This is totally different than what I was taught, in Roman Catholic high school, etc. Totally different, and it was disrupting in your life to have that kind of experience. But so this is fun stuff here. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us. For good and evil imply awareness, and death is the privation of all awareness. Therefore, a right understanding that death is nothing to us makes the mortality of life enjoyable, not by adding to life an unlimited time, but by taking away the yearning after immortality. For life has no terror for those who thoroughly apprehend that there are no terrors for them in ceasing to live. Foolish, therefore, is the person who says that he fears death, not because it will pain when it comes, but because of pains in the prospect. Whatever causes no annoyance when it is present causes only a groundless pain in the expectation. Death, therefore, the most awful of evils, is nothing to us, seeing that, when we are, death is not come, and when death is come, we are not. It is nothing, then, either to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and the dead exist no longer. But in the world, at one time, people shunned death as the greatest of all evils, etc., etc. Kind of interesting. But notice what he's trying to do is have a good life without stress, but have all the benefits that life can offer without in turn being stressed out by things. So that's kind of where I think Epicurus is of interest to us. And these are all viable choices that we can make today. If you're of the belief that the soul doesn't go on and that we have to do the kinds of things to protect our soul